The purpose of this video is to demonstrate distortion particles and how distortion can be used to make fire look a little bit better, and as well as other advanced material concepts. So right here we have a very simple fire sequence. There's not much really to say about it. It could loop a little bit better, but we don't really care about looping because we're going to use distortion. This is virtually identical in terms of the emitter, but now we've added some distortion to the particle system, and as you can see, it gives it some interesting movement. There's some weird stuff going on with it, but overall, you can see how distortion definitely adds something to this idea of making a better fire in game. So we come over here, and now what we've done is we've changed the particle system so that it looks like it's covering the top of this wooden block. We've also messed around a little bit with the lifetime of the particle itself and with some of the distortion properties. So now what we have is something that looks a lot more like fire. It moves like fire, it's kinetic and fun, and we've also got depth fade on it. One of the things that's missing, I think, from this is a real connection to the wooden block itself, and I think that is generally missing in a lot of fire effects, simply because a lot of engines don't have the technology or they don't have the hardware oomph to solve the problem, which is how we get over to here. This is the exact same effect as the one you just saw, but now we've used depth fade and the world normals, as well as two additional textures to make the fire look like it's actually coming up off of the wooden block itself. This, like I said, is the exact same particle system. So looking over our distortion fire material, we have four main sections. The first starts with our distortion, which is done through the traditional means, where you take a panning texture and then you run it into a texture coordinate that modifies the UVs of whatever textures you're sampling. The second part is color and alpha, which are also done through mostly traditional methods. Alpha being the only exception, because in this section we are generating our depth fade and a depth fade mask. This depth fade mask is used in our world normal masking section. So in the world normal masking section, we have two different textures that we are sampling in order to project onto different directions in our world normals. The first thing we do is we take in our scene texture normal and split it into its RG and B values, or I prefer to refer to them in X, Y, and Z values. Our Z values and X and Y values are then basically turned into masks and then transformed into those textures through those masks, which are finally modified by the depth fade mask that we generated. That makes sure that we basically project these textures on the appropriate surfaces and only on objects that intersect with the particle to a depth that looks good to us. The final result is a fire that is more robust than a normal particle fire and is still fairly simple in terms of its construction. We still have plenty of room to add things like sparks and smokes and distortion effects, but what we have here is a fire that will look good in a lot of different situations. No matter what surface you put it next to, it interacts with that surface in a way that feels more like real fire might, where a traditional particle system would simply intersect and fade. So that basically concludes this little demonstration of distortion particles with some advanced concepts applied. Um, Thank you for listening.